Today it is my absolute honor to present Margaret Ajemian, the author for A Knock at the Door. The students have read your work, Margaret, and they understand the context for your work, and I told them to make sure that they come prepared, and we're interested. I just want to give Margaret a round of applause. Thank you so much for coming into the class.
I applaud you for reading the book. We need to recognize what has happened, what they did, all the theys, so that we, living today, can try to stop it. That's like a major thing. How do we stop this? Very, very difficult. I'm not here to tell you how that can happen. That's Jason's job. He's going to tell you that. I can only tell you about my mother, who survived the Armenian genocide. She was 15 when forced to march. She was raped, beaten, lived with an abusive man for 2 years, and escaped, marched barefooted, as you all know. You've read the book. I don't want to reiterate what you've read, but just to give you a quick overview and go back for a minute, she walked back barefooted to her town. She escaped. She came to this country under the name of Margaret, which is why I have my name. But this woman was never bitter, never angry. She survived, and so psychology-wise, which was my undergraduate degree, how does one suffer all that and then become a normal person? You know, we have friends of ours, maybe students, friends of yours, patients of Jason, who say, I can't make it because I lost my job. I can't do it. I'm going to lose my mind. They need to read this or other books like it to find out that someone who has been totally abused can find a way. So I've been on book tour now since 2007. I'm still marching along, and it's like the never-ending book tour. I'm happy to be here. Jason is extending that tour. And the story is a psychological, at Harvard, it was the psychology department like this that invited me to speak. Because the psychology of this woman, it's very rare and very unusual, to survive and be happy. Well, as you know, she was funny. As you know, I said to her, why did God allow this? And she said, I don't know. When I see him, I'll ask him. Just like that, very sassy. So how does that happen? How does it happen that we go through some traumas here and we can't get over it? And this woman went through these amazing traumas. So from Berkeley, a lady, this is another interesting story. Oh, so many interesting stories with my driver. The publisher gives you a driver to pick you up, take you to your hotel, take you to your NPR store, your TV, So I'm with this woman, Amy. Her name was Amy, A-M-Y. This is A-M-I-E. And we were together for a week, traveling to all these places. At the end of that week, we had an NPR session on our way to airport. And so it's 8 o'clock in the morning. So I'm there, and it's Mike McCormick, and he said, well, do you mind if we video this, Margaret? As Jason is doing now. And I said, no, of course, it's fine. I put a little lipstick on, and it was very early. We talked about my book. We talked about my story. We talked about my mother. We talked about all of my angst, fearing Turks that I don't even know, from the stories that my mother told me. Because as you in psychology know, fear, like genes, trickles down from you to me, from him to her. This trickled down to me. I don't want this. So I said to Mike McCormick, you know, I really want to be rid of this. I want to find a nice Turk and give him a hug. I want to be over this. Well, that was the end of that interview. On the way to the airport, Amy, my driver, said, Margaret, do you mind if we stop for coffee? We stopped at the French Market for coffee. And while we're having this coffee, Amy, out of her tote bag, lifts a photograph of her family. I said, Amy, that looks just like my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my family. You're Armenian and you didn't tell me you were saving it. She shook her head. She said, no. I get that same chill now every time I tell it. I'm Turkish. Amy. So I jumped around the table, gave Amy a big hug, and I was so excited. I was so excited. We got to the airport. She had a necklace on her neck made in Turkey. She put it on my neck. We hugged and kissed. She said, Margaret, we know what happened to the Armenians. We know what happened to the Armenians. And I bought your book for all my family, all of my relatives, everybody. Because it was ancient history. It's the Ottoman Empire. It's not today. It's not the Turkish government today. My mother survived. She was very funny. She was always humorous. And she never regretted or hated or had hatred. And I don't have hatred. I just have this angst, this feeling of I need reconciliation. How can I forgive you if you don't tell me you did it? Now I know the Bible says, forgive somebody, whether they did it or not. I guess I'm not smart enough or gracious enough to be able to do that. I need you to say, I did it. Then I can say, okay, I forgive you. So it's a difficult time for me. And then, I've been on tour for so long, I always say, as bad as the Ottoman Empire was then, we as Americans haven't been too terrific either. Elizabeth Colbert, 2006, New Yorker magazine, wrote a beautiful article on Taner Akçam, a Turkish scholar and historian. I wrote a wonderful book called A Shameful Act. I always mention Taner. He always says to me, Margaret, I know when you're on book tour because my book sales go up. I always say, my book is a memoir. It's a mother-daughter story. It is something from the heart. There's no facts and figures in here. I did this book for my master's thesis, which was my thesis, and it was called Flowers for Esther. Okay, but before I finished all of that, I had footnotes, I had bibliography, I had all the things that a good book should have. And then I realized that books like that had been written before, much more intelligent, much more intricate, and much more extended with information than mine. So that's when I took away the footnotes, took away the bibliography, and created a mother-daughter story. Because I thought it would reach a greater volume of people. Who wants to read a historical story about a genocide? Nobody. But people want to read about a mother-daughter story, and then they'll get this story on the side that they never heard about. That was my plot and my plan, and it seemed to work. But I always mention Taner Akçam on my tours, because Taner is a good friend. But he's a Turkish philosopher, historian, journalist, who spent a year in prison for talking about this story. It's not mine, but his. He has the facts. He has the German cipher telegrams. He has actually everything that proves it was a genocide. The Turkish government today says it was a byproduct of the war. That was part of it. But no, this was a decision to get rid of Armenians and Greeks and Christians in the country at that time. My book doesn't prove that. If you want proof of it, read Taner Akçam, A-K-C-A-M. It's called A Shameful Act. He proves it. Because as a Turkish citizen, Taner was able to go into the archives, the Turkish archives, no Armenian could go into. He was able to find the truth. And he wrote about it. So he suffered the consequences, but he's a good man, and he said, Margaret, I'm just here to tell the truth. And he told the truth, spent time in jail, and but he still goes back to Turkey.
I'm glad that you mentioned the fact about you coming from the background of your family being involved in a direct genocide. What is your take in relationship of what was just said in reference to the church said that it happened, we're going to go on. What is your take as far as the never admitted, never claimed slavery and potential genocide qualification of African Americans from centuries on? I mean, they made all these particular type of documents or rules that were supposed to assimilate and have African Americans go on, but never acknowledge any wrongdoing.
No, and you're absolutely right. And I talk about this everywhere I go, because there's a wonderful article, Elizabeth Colbert, New Yorker magazine, 2006, where she talks about the Turkish genocide, but she also talks about, I'm going to read this because it's very poignant and exactly answers your question. This is her article. Before the arrival of the first Europeans, there were estimated 40 million indigenous people living in the Americas. 40 million. By 1650, fewer than 10 million were left. The decline was a result of casual cruelty on one hand, diseases unwittingly spread, and systematic slaughter on the other. This is a fact. We, and I say myself, I'm the descendant of these people that did this. Does anybody recognize it? Her bottom line is, because this is about the Turkish book, we may side with the Armenians, but historically speaking, we probably have more in common with the Turks. That answers your slavery question. We have not acknowledged. The indigenous people we have not acknowledged. And we talk about 6 million Jews dying. We talk about 1.5 million dying. We're talking about 30 million people disappeared. Not 10,000 or 20,000, 30 million included in there. I'm sick and ashamed of that. I don't have an answer to that. But somebody should march on and want that also. Yes. Yes.
Is there a negative stigma on the Armenians who stay behind and get married to Kurds to survive? Is there still stigma on them?
That's a great question, because I always thought there would be, but they didn't talk about it. And this is one of the reasons, to answer you as well, why this wasn't recognized. When the Armenians came here, those that survived, like my mother, they wanted to assimilate. They wanted to be American. They didn't want to talk about what happened. It was a shame. It was a shame what happened. So the word, use that wonderful word, mortsid, which means forget in Armenian. The Jews, on the other hand, came here and said, remember, remember, never again remember. Henry Morgenthau, who was the great-grandson, a friend of mine, we sat at his kitchen table one day and he said, Margaret, did it ever occur to you that the Armenians came here and said, forget, and the Jews said, remember? And I thought, whoa! I didn't make that connection, but I think that had a big, big thing to do with it.
I know your mother was in an Armenian old folks home. When you were growing up, were all your parents' friends Armenians, or did they assimilate in the way that they just kind of tried to not avoid other Armenians, But like you said, with the Jews, it's never forget, and we live together and we don't trust others. Did the same thing happen with you growing up?
Well, I grew up
Or
in
that
the
you
Bronx.
remember?
I grew up in the Bronx.
Was it Armenian neighborhood?
And in the Bronx. No, it wasn't an Armenian neighborhood. It was a poor neighborhood. I lived in a 5-story walk-up in a tenement. Did I know we were poor? No. Because we had clean clothes. My mother made my clothes. It was always ironed and pressed. I went to school. We always had food. I certainly was never hungry. So I didn't understand this starving Armenian thing. You don't know you're poor if you live in this area. The only way you know you're poor is if suddenly you go to a rich neighborhood and you say, wait a minute, I think I'm poor. But I didn't know that. I didn't. And there were Jewish people, Italians, Germans, and Irish. I will say this, the Germans in the neighborhood during the war were kind of like, don't talk to them, they're German. There were no Japanese, so I didn't know that. And I had a little German guy that I thought I was in love with at 11 years old, and my first kiss on the rooftop, my son doesn't know this story. My first kiss on the rooftop was this handsome German, blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy, and got this little kiss, and I have never forgotten it. That was it. And that was like, don't talk to the Germans. You know, but the Jews and everybody else were all fine. We here in this room know that the mind remembers what it remembers. You can't make it remember more unless you're lying. And you can make it remember less because you're withholding. But she could not remember more. I found that so amazing because I was studying at the same time I was questioning her. Well then, the next day, what did he say? She told me what she remembered, and I put it in the book. I didn't add, and I didn't delete. I would love to have had more, but this is what I got. Yes?
You had mentioned earlier about some of there seems to be like an aggressive movement in terms of like suppressing or denying the story that you've told, your mother's story, and stories of others that try to raise awareness about this genocide. And it seems that that may be coming, that there might be some sense of fear of people knowing about it. What do you think they're necessarily afraid of if people are made aware of this genocide? Is it just the negative stigma attached to it?
That's an interesting point. Why, indeed? You know, when I didn't think I finished that story about being in the taxi, getting back to my place of abode in New York. I knew he was Turkish. Did I finish that story? I don't think I did. I think I got sidetracked there. But he was Turkish. I was in this taxi. When I knew he was Turkish, I was frightened. Why? I don't know. Why? Because I've got this angst that comes down to me psychologically through my mother. When I got to the destination, I had my hand on the doorknob. And I said to him, I'm Armenian. Pretty stupid thing to say to a taxi driver, right? And he turned to me immediately. No question, no hesitation. That's a lie. It never happened. There was no genocide. It's a lie. And I said, yes, it did happen. It happened to my mother. She was a survivor of the Armenian genocide. Yes, it did. And I run out the door. The doorman has his hand on the other side. And I get in the lobby. And I think to myself, I sounded like a 6-year-old. Yeah, yes it did. It happened. Yes it did. But his reaction was, just, I'm Armenian. It's a lie. It never happened. Mine was, yes it did. So, you know, I have this, he's got this stuff going on too, because he wants to tell me it never happened. Well, he doesn't know it never happened, and I only know it happened because I have a first person telling me it happened. Maybe he has somebody on his end who's telling him it never happened. So, you know, I'm not blaming him. I'm only saying this is what's happening today. Yes?
I have a question. You said the Armenian genocide was recognized that would prevent the later genocide to happen. But there's a fact that the Holocaust happened and it's recognized, but there is still genocide goes on to this time. And many of them even not give a turn a blind eye to, but sometimes they seem like legalized. It's a crime, but it's a legalized crime, international legalized crime. Do you think it makes it different?
What would be a legalized crime? I think I missed that.
If the genocide is happening, and the international community
Ignore it.
would ignore it,
Yes.
For me it's legalized. If the perpetrators travel around and they're free,
That's
they're
a
not
very
in the
good
international
point. That's a
courts.
very good point. Now, how do we tell the world that what's happening? Why doesn't the UN? Oh, go.
That's how we tell the world. You tell me.
You tell them.
Yes.
My question was simply, if it was in fact recognized as a genocide, what would you propose as possible, like, reparations? For
Reparations
Yeah.
are a very big part of this, I think. I'm not looking for reparation. The difficult thing is that the Armenians are like there's a Republican and Democrat. There are two parties, and each one wants to be the one to bring a resolution here. I'm not looking for reparation. I'm just looking for recognition and reconciliation. So, can you do that without reparation? I hope so. Or, I'll tell you my feeling. You can't ask somebody for a blank check. The Jews did. They had a blank check. Germany said we did it, and there was no number attached to it, and it worked. I don't think it'll work now. I don't know. My feeling is, say, whoever comes to the foreground, this is what we would like. If you came to me and said, Margaret, I want you to pay for my car, and I say, how much is your car worth? Oh, I don't know, but write me a check and I'll put a number in. I'm not going to be happy with that. And my feeling is we need to come forth with something. That's the difficult part. And frankly, on the side of the Turkish government, I have to think, that's pretty scary. To have no number, but again, this is beyond me. This is not what my book is about. It's a legal thing, and the lawyers and the accountants, the brilliant people of the world, they're not here, they're somewhere. We'll figure it out. Yes.
Do you think something like the truth and reconciliation that happened in South Africa after the apartheid, do you think something like that can actually have an impact in, the lives of the Armenian people, the people that, the Turkish people are able to come up and, apologize for whatever acts they did and, kind of like come out to say what they did and, get acknowledgement or apology from these people? Do you think that can be a something?
It would certainly help me and probably a lot of people. Because if you tell me, you're sorry, I'm ready to forgive you. And I think that was a wonderful, beautiful analogy you just made. Yeah. And there are, my driver, that lady, there are people. I got an email from a wonderful guy in Australia, and he said, I'm a guy, Turkish guy, living in Australia. I heard what happened to you at Barnes & Noble. It was a big upset, big protest. And he said, don't worry. I know what happened to Armenians. We all know. We Kurds and Turks know. So he clumped the Kurds in there too. I have his email today. That was so beautiful. Yes, that would be a wonderful answer. A wonderful answer. So I'm praying for it.
Do you feel any kind of animosity? If, let's say, you see a clerk, and do you still have this feeling, or are you ready to just forgive?
I am ready to forgive. I have this, Amy. I don't feel animosity. No, neither did my mother.
Okay.
I feel fear. I took my mother to Armenia, and she spoke only Armenian. she spoke only English during that trip, and I spoke Armenian. I think she didn't know if she was in Turkey, because we flew all the way across, and we were in Yerevan, Armenia, and not far from the Turkish border. I think she was scared. So she's speaking English like a British lady. I'll have tea with cream and sugar. And I'm speaking Armenian the whole time. She never said why. That's what I think. I don't have hatred. And sometimes I have this fear and angst that I want to get rid of. And I'm getting better. I'm feeling better all the time. Because as I talk about it, I realize that there are so many good Turkish people out there that feel the same way I do. And I read the newspapers, and they're out there, and they're marching this. They want to recognize this, okay? We want to do a lot of things, and our government is stopping us. I don't mean even just that. What I'm saying is the people don't have the power we think they do. We in America here, maybe against some of our foreign policy. Do we have any voice about it? Other than vote for the right person. We don't agree with that, but it happens. The people in Turkey have the same problem. They are heartfelt, they understand, but they have people who they've elected or are elected in office have a different viewpoint. So hopefully it'll come around. Her faith was strong in all faiths. I mean, there are so many strong, wonderful Muslims that I know who are so good and wonderful, and their faith is as strong as my mother's Christian faith.
Yes.
And the Jewish faith and the Jewish religion. Strength in your own religion. All religions preach good stuff. Good stuff. And the Dalai Lama is reading my book.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to comment you on page 178. I find it so beautiful about the Chinese lady who once told you.
170?
Yeah, 178. It is so beautifully written. I had to circle it.
Oh. 170?
178. Page 178.
Oh. I see it there.
I find it so, I find it extremely nice.
15,
Okay.
Dinner with a Turk?
Yes.
Yeah,
Page
the bottom.
15,
Oh.
you know, with the Turks. A Chinese lady once told me
Oh.
that flowers bud in the mud at the bottom of the pond and all the flowers flower when they come to the top.
Yeah.
I'm a little like this flower. I was so deep in the mud of sickness and death. It's a miracle I bloomed that long.
Well, you know, that's so exciting, and so thank you for that.
So refreshing.
She did, she bloomed, and that's what's part of this psychology. It's so wonderful that you could live in this hell and come out and be, she was funny. I said to her, why didn't God step in and save the Armenians? And she said, when I see him, I'll ask him. I mean, very offhand, just funny. Can you imagine? Well, I can't imagine. She was, how she made it. Thank you for that. That was a nice touch.